The council chamber of the Galactic Concord was so vast that voices took seconds to return as echoes, like ghosts reluctant to leave. Beneath its shimmering dome of living crystal, delegates of 2,000 species sat in solemn silence. The vote had just concluded. The words hung in the air, translated into every known tongue. By decree of the Concord, humanity is to be quarantined, indefinitely. No one cheered. No one dared breathe. The humans present, 3 diplomats from a little blue world, stood perfectly still, their faces unreadable. Their leader, Ambassador Reiko Liao, simply bowed her head once, her black hair falling forward to hide her eyes. Then, without a word, she turned and left the chamber. Behind her, the great doors sealed with the sound of a thunderclap, locking humanity out of the stars. The year was 2874 Galactic Standard. Humanity had been among the stars for less than 2 centuries, but in that time, they had changed the course of the galaxy more than any species before them. They had arrived like wildfire, spreading across the void, colonizing barren moons, breathing life into forgotten planets, and, when challenged, fighting like cornered wolves. That was their crime. Not what they'd done, but what they were. The Council's words were diplomatic, almost sterile. Species exhibiting excessive aggression and potential for galactic destabilization shall be contained until re-evaluation. But everyone knew what it meant. The other races feared humans, their strength, their adaptability, their unpredictability, and perhaps most of all, their refusal to submit to anything but their own will. On Earth, the news was met with fury and disbelief. Entire fleets recalled from joint patrols, trade routes severed overnight. Human colonies that had spent decades building trust were now left adrift, suddenly alone in the dark. The United Terran Confederacy tried to keep order, but the rage simmered everywhere, from the domed cities of Mars to the mining tunnels of Titan. But Reiko Liao, now back on Earth, sat in silence before the Pacific, watching the waves crash against the old seawall near New Kyoto. "They were right," she whispered once. "We are dangerous." She didn't mean it as regret. 30 years passed. The galaxy moved on, or tried to. Humanity was gone from the stars, walled behind its solar borders, monitored by autonomous sentinels that blinked like distant lighthouses in the void. The other species prospered without them, or so they claimed. But cracks had begun to show. The Zelari fleets were losing territory to the Sarnak hordes. The Uran Confederacy had collapsed into civil war. Trade between outer sectors had slowed to a crawl. The Concord's great peace, once maintained by human ingenuity and military logistics, now faltered. And in the shadows of dying suns, something else stirred. At first, it was just rumors, colonies vanishing overnight. Patrols found adrift with no life signs, entire planets stripped of their atmospheres. Then came the transmissions, fragmented, incoherent screams cut short by static. A new enemy had entered the galaxy, silent and merciless. They were called many names: the Voidborn, the Black Tide, the Devourers, but no one knew what they truly were. Until the Council received a single transmission from the frontier world of Keroth 9. It was short, just one sentence, but it froze the blood of every species that heard it. "They're not here to conquer. They're here to consume." The first battles were swift and hopeless. The Devourers didn't use ships in the traditional sense. They were the ships, massive biomechanical leviathans that fed on energy and matter alike. Worlds burned in days. Entire fleets were absorbed. Their metals and crew turned into new monsters. The galaxy's most powerful empires, united under the Council's banner, threw everything they had, and lost everything in return. Within 5 years, a third of the Outer Rim was gone. Refugees flooded the inner systems. The Concord's command structure fractured. The surviving races, desperate and panicked, began turning on one another. And then finally, someone said what none dared to before: "We need the humans." It began as a whisper among the military caste of the Zelari, spread through smuggler networks, and reached the highest halls of the Council. The idea was heresy, After all, humanity had been exiled precisely because they were too dangerous. But now, the danger no longer mattered. The devourers were winning, and humanity, in all their violent, stubborn glory, might be the only ones capable of matching such hunger. The Council's flagship, Eclipse of Harmony, descended into Sol's system after almost 3 decades of silence. It was a quiet approach. No grand announcements, no media coverage. Just a single diplomatic envoy led by Elder Sirac of the Quarith, one of the few still alive from the time of humanity's exile. They arrived at the orbital station above Mars, a relic of a bygone age, still maintained by human hands. The station commander, a woman named Captain Nadia Holt, received them with suspicion. She was born long after the exile, but her family had not forgotten the insult. "You've got some nerve coming here," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. Sirac's mandibles clicked in nervous rhythm. "Captain Holt, the galaxy burns. We require assistance. Your species' experience in warfare is unparalleled." "You mean our excessive aggression, right?" The alien lowered his gaze. "Yes, that." Holt leaned against the viewport, staring at the red dust below. Mars was thriving, terraformed deserts blooming with green. Humanity had not stagnated in isolation. It had evolved. They had built new fleets, new weapons, and, more importantly, new resolve. "Why now?" she asked. "After you cut us off? After you called us monsters?" Serac's voice trembled. "Because monsters may be the only ones who can fight other monsters." Earth's leaders gathered in Geneva Orbital. The Council's plea was broadcast live to every colony and city. Across the system, billions watched as alien faces flickered across the screens, faces that once condemned them. Elder Serac spoke with a humility rare among his kind. "We misjudged you. We feared your nature, your violence, your hunger for victory. But now we see that these are not flaws. They are survival." A long silence followed. Then President Amani Cade stood. "And what would you have us do?" "Save us," Serac said simply. "Save the galaxy." Laughter erupted, not mocking but bitter. "Save you?" Cade repeated. "When you left us to die in the dark?" The chamber murmured, tension thick enough to choke on. But behind Cade, a holographic image appeared. Grainy footage from Kiroth 9. The Devourers. Their black organic ships flowing through space like liquid shadow. Their weapons bending gravity. Their movements more like instinct than design. For the first time, even hardened soldiers looked afraid. Cade's expression hardened. "We don't do mercy for those who abandon us," she said. "But we do fight for survival. And if your war threatens our home, then it's our war too." Cheers erupted across the Terran colonies. The Council hadn't expected forgiveness, and they didn't receive it. But they got something far more dangerous: human involvement. The first Terran fleets left orbit 6 months later. Sleek angular warships bearing the insignia of the old Confederacy. Their hulls marked not with names, but with warnings. "Don't follow us." The Vigilant Dawn, flagship of the 3rd Expeditionary Force, led the charge. At its helm was Admiral Rain Cortez, a veteran born after exile, raised on stories of the stars humanity once walked. She had no love for the Council, but she had a fire in her eyes that made even the aliens uneasy. Her first words to her crew before entering the jump gate became legend. "They declared us too dangerous." They were right. Let's remind them why. The first engagement took place in the ruined system of Sarnath Theta, where the Devourers had turned entire planets into molten slag. The combined Council fleets were already in retreat when the humans arrived. Alien commanders warned them not to engage directly, that it was suicide. Cortez ignored them. The Terran fleet emerged from hyperspace in a perfect wedge, firing before the enemy could react. Their weapons, kinetic slugs wrapped in plasma, ripped through the Leviathan ships like harpoons through flesh. When the Devourers counterattacked, the humans didn't retreat. They advanced. They used tactics the other races had long abandoned as barbaric: close-range brawling, ramming maneuvers, nuclear saturation strikes. The void became a storm of light and ruin. In less than 12 hours, the humans did what no one else could. They stopped the advance. Not one, not yet, but stopped it. The Council fleet commanders stared in disbelief as human warships limped back to formation, smoke and debris trailing like banners of defiance. Half the fleet was lost, but the line held. When the transmission arrived from Admiral Cortez to the Council command, her voice was calm, almost cold. Contact established with the enemy. They bleed. That's all we needed to know. Back on Earth, Reiko Liao, now an old woman, watched the broadcasts in silence. The same council that had once shunned her people now sent daily requests for strategy meetings, logistics support, and weapons coordination. But humanity didn't rush. They remembered. Every favor came with a cost. Every supply route had conditions. Humanity was saving the galaxy, but on its own terms, and in quiet moments, when the stars shimmered over the new oceans of Mars, some whispered a question none dared answer aloud. If humanity won this war, would the Council ever again be able to control them? Because deep down, everyone knew the truth. The galaxy hadn't just invited its saviors back. It had invited its predators. The wreckage drifted through the void like the bones of dead gods. Charred hulls, melted alloys, the frozen remains of ships that had once been proud carriers of the Council's might, all scattered now across the black gulf of Sarnath Theta. Among them glided the Terran fleet, engines burning cold blue, their hulls painted matte gray to swallow starlight. They moved with purpose, not triumph. Humanity had won the first battle, but no one in those steel corridors felt victorious. Victory implied an end. This was only the beginning. Admiral Rain Cortez stood on the bridge of the Vigilant Dawn, her reflection cast against the viewport's glow. Her uniform was scorched along one shoulder, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth torn from a fallen crewmate's flag patch. Around her, officers worked in silence, the hum of machinery filling the absence of celebration. They'd learned what the Council never had. The Devourers were not an enemy that could be defeated through ceremony or pride. They were hunger given form, a force of nature that fed on arrogance. Casualty report? Cortez asked. 58% losses across the fleet, Admiral, her second-in-command replied. But the line holds. The enemy's retreat vector is confirmed. They're regrouping, Cortez nodded once. Good, let them. We need to see what they do when they're afraid. Fear, if the Devourers even felt it, was something new to them. They'd never been stopped before. But now they had tasted the violence of humankind, and it had burned. From the far edge of the system, the Council's surviving ships watched, transmitting endless queries and diplomatic protocols, begging to coordinate. Cortez ignored most of them. She didn't trust them, not yet. The humans weren't fighting for the Council. They were fighting for survival, for revenge, for something in their nature that demanded no predator ever claim dominion over them again. Back on Earth, President Amani Cade stood in the war chamber beneath Geneva Orbital, surrounded by advisors and glowing maps of stellar systems. Across the holographic table, alien diplomats waited for the human decision on the next move. They looked exhausted, their colors dim, their pheromones heavy with dread. The Devourers are regrouping in the Perseus Reach, said Elder Serac. If they break through there, the entire inner belt will fall. We must combine our fleets. Cade studied the map in silence, fingers drumming against her armrest. The Devourers' advance was methodical. Each captured world converted into another spawning ground. Each defeat only a temporary delay. She could see the path they were carving, a slow spiral toward the galactic core. You want to combine our fleets? She said finally. You want us to protect your core worlds? The Uran representative nodded. It's the only way. If we lose the core, all is lost. Cade smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You mean your core? Not ours. The alien shifted uneasily. Humanity had become a mirror for the galaxy's hypocrisy. 30 years ago, they were too dangerous to be trusted. Now they were the only ones capable of holding the line. Cade leaned forward, voice low. You want humanity to fight your war? Then you do it our way. No vetoes, no restrictions. You give us command authority. full tactical control, and access to your entire industrial base. The chamber erupted in protest. That's unacceptable. We can't grant unilateral— Cade cut them off with a raised hand. Then go die on your own. We'll hold the solar system and watch the rest burn. Silence fell. Elder Serac looked at her with something like admiration. You truly have no fear, do you? Of course I do, Cade said. That's why I'm still alive. Within hours, the Concord capitulated. Humanity would take command of all joint operations. The Terran Military Directorate, revived from the ashes of old Earth's Defense Command, became the beating heart of the new alliance. Human officers began training alien crews, refitting their ships, rewriting centuries of pacifistic doctrine in a matter of weeks. Where once fleets were designed for deterrence, now they were reforged for annihilation. And for the first time in galactic history, the Council's armies began to look like a war machine. The campaign began in the shadow of the dying star Vorthal Prime. The Devourers had nested there, feeding on the star's energy while spawning new leviathans from planetary debris. The human-led alliance arrived with 300 ships, half of them Terran. The Council admirals watched in awe as the humans deployed orbital mines, electromagnetic decoys, and swarm drones that fought like angry hornets. Every tactic was brutal, efficient, and utterly alien to their philosophy. When the Devourers emerged, vast silhouettes gliding through the corona like sharks in bloodied water, the humans struck first. Cortez's voice echoed through every channel. Target their hearts. Don't give them time to adapt. The sky became fire. Nuclear detonations flared brighter than dawn. Rail cannons screamed, tearing through black carapace. The Devourers answered with beams that bent space itself. But the humans met them head-on, closing to knife range, boarding their bodies, planting antimatter charges by hand. When the battle ended, Vorthal Prime's light dimmed forever, but the Devourers were gone. Not defeated, not destroyed, but driven back. Afterward, in the makeshift command center aboard the Eclipse of Harmony, Elder Serac faced Cortez. "You fight like demons," he said. Cortez cleaned blood from her gloves, green and black, alien and human alike. "No," she said. "Demons fight for pleasure. We fight because someone has to." The Council began to realize what they had unleashed. Humanity didn't just fight. They adapted, learned, improved. Every engagement taught them something. Every loss was turned into a weapon. Their scientists studied devourer biology with morbid fascination, creating hybrid countermeasures, living missiles, symbiotic armor plating, nanite plagues that infected the enemy's organic hulls. The other races watched in awe and fear. It wasn't just that the humans were winning. It was how easily they seemed to thrive in chaos. Rumors spread through the fleet. Human soldiers who survived close contact with the Devourers spoke of hearing whispers, feeling hunger not their own. And yet, instead of breaking, they grew colder, sharper. Some said they were beginning to understand their enemy too well. 6 months into the campaign, Cortez received an encrypted transmission from Earth. President Cade's voice was grim. "Admiral, reconnaissance drones near the Oort line picked up something unusual. A Devourer fragment, half dead, but it was heading towards Sol, not away. We think they're probing us." Cortez's jaw tightened. "So they finally noticed the humans." "You need to return," Cade said. "We're fortifying every orbital defense we have, but if they find a way in—" "They won't," Cortez interrupted. "We'll draw them out before they reach us." She cut the transmission and stared at the tactical display. The enemy had begun adapting faster. Their ships were regenerating damage mid-battle. They were learning. It was only a matter of time before they evolved beyond even human brutality. "Prep the next jump," she ordered. "We're taking the fight to the edge." Her officers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what that meant. The edge, where space grew thin, where even light struggled to escape. The region the Devourers called home. Weeks later, the Terran fleet reached the abyssal rift. The void here was deeper, darker, almost alive. Gravity twisted like breath. Long-dead stars shimmered as faint echoes of radiation. And in that blackness, they saw it. A structure so vast it eclipsed entire constellations. It wasn't built. It had grown. "The source," whispered Cortez. "Their nest," sensors screamed. Thousands of signatures bloomed around the structure, like spores released from a dying world. The devourers were awakening in numbers no fleet could match. Cortez closed her eyes. She'd known it would come to this. Humanity was not built to wait for death. They were built to choose where it happened. "All ships, full spread," she said quietly. "Prepare the Scorched Earth Protocol." Her second-in-command paled. "Admiral, that's a suicide order." Cortez looked at him, her eyes calm and steady. "We'll die eventually, but not quietly." She opened a channel to the Council's command network. "This is Admiral Rain Cortez of the Terran Fleet. The enemy's heart is here. We're lighting the match. You want to survive? You follow our example. You fight like humans." The transmission cut. The vigilant dawn turned toward the heart of darkness, engines roaring, its crew singing the old war hymns of Earth, the kind written when humans still fought each other over land and faith and pride. Behind them, 300 ships followed. The devourers surged like a tidal wave, blotting out the stars. The humans met them head-on. The battle that followed would later be called the Night of Fire. Historians from 100 worlds would write about it, but none could capture what it felt like. The soundless fury of light in vacuum, the silence after a scream, the sight of men and women choosing to burn rather than bend. Hours turned to days. Ships vanished into the abyss, their last transmissions fragments of laughter and static. The vigilant dawn drove straight into the structure's core, carrying with it a payload of antimatter warheads and something far more dangerous, a captured devourer brain, fused to human AI. When the core detonated, the explosion wasn't just physical, it was psychic. Across the galaxy, the devourers screamed as their hive mind fractured. The wave of energy tore through systems, collapsing wormholes, scattering fleets, and then silence. Months later, wreckage from the rift drifted into nearby systems, pieces of Terran ships, fragments of the devourer heart. The Council scoured for survivors but found only ghosts, until one day a faint signal emerged from the darkness. "This is Cortez, mission complete. Don't follow." The transmission ended. No one knew if she lived. Some said the humans had perished entirely in that last stand. Others whispered that they'd gone deeper, beyond the rift, into the dark, hunting what remained. Back on Earth, when news of the explosion reached President Cade, she stood alone on the balcony of Geneva Orbital, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. For the first time in decades, the stars seemed quiet. Elder Serac approached slowly. "You saved us," he said. Cade didn't turn. "No," she said softly. "We saved ourselves. You just happened to be in the way." He bowed his head. "What will humanity do now?" Cade smiled faintly, eyes on the horizon. "We'll rebuild. But not for you. Not for your council. We've seen what's out there. The void's deeper than any of you imagined. Someone has to stand watch." And so, while the rest of the galaxy celebrated peace, humanity began preparing again. Quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. Because they understood something the others didn't. Peace wasn't the end. It was the pause before the next war. The galaxy called it peace. But to humanity, it was only silence. An uneasy quiet that came after the screaming stopped. The war with the devourers had ended in fire and absence. The rift was gone, burned into a field of twisted gravity scars, where nothing moved or grew. Yet across the Council's core worlds, banners of victory waved, songs were written, and statues of alien heroes rose in plazas that humanity would never see. The official records credited the Allied Concord forces with the triumph. Humanity's name was barely mentioned, and when it was, it came with careful restraint, assistance provided by Terran elements, as though the Terrans were a natural disaster that had briefly saved the day. But the other species remembered. They remembered the screams, the burning light of human engines plunging into darkness, the defiance that had turned the tide. They remembered what they had unleashed. For decades afterward, no alien ship entered the Sol system without invitation. The Council called it respect. The humans called it distance. They'd earned both. Admiral Rain Cortez's transmission, "Don't follow," had become legend. It was repeated like scripture among the Terran fleets, and whispered in council academies. Children born after the war grew up under her shadow, told that she had vanished beyond the edge of known space, hunting the remnants of the Devourers. Whether she survived or not didn't matter anymore. Humanity had found its myth. On Earth, President Amani Cade retired after 30 years of reconstruction. Under her leadership, the Terran Confederacy transformed. What had once been a fractured collection of colonies became a singular civilization, a species that had learned to live without the galaxy, to thrive in exile. They built shipyards in the dark of Neptune, orbital cities that glowed like halos above Mars, and vast subterranean archives beneath the moon that held every scrap of knowledge recovered from the war. They no longer sought to join the galaxy. They were preparing for what might come after it. But peace is never stable when fear lingers. The Council had begun to fracture again, quietly, subtly. The Zalari disputed territorial lines with the Urin. The Sarnak accused the Quarith of hoarding war salvage. Old rivalries resurfaced beneath the polite language of treaties. And in every meeting, one unspoken question hovered. What happens when the humans come back? Because they hadn't been seen in almost 40 years. Terran ships no longer answered Council signals. Their colonies were closed, their beacons silent. The few merchants who ventured near Sol claimed to see strange lights in the dark. Fleets moving without registration, vessels shaped like nothing the Council had built. There were even rumors that the humans had developed ships that no longer used hyperspace at all, that they'd learned to bend the void itself. Elder Serac, one of the last of the old guard, often wondered what they had become. He still carried the weight of that first plea, the shame of begging the species he once condemned. He lived now on Aurelion, the Council's seat of governance, in a tower overlooking the silver seas. He was older, his carapace dulled with age, his voice faint. Yet when the night winds rose, he still heard the echoes of that human voice. Cortez whispering from the abyss, "We'll die eventually, but not quietly." One night, as he studied the endless stars, a faint pulse crossed the Council's deep space networks. A signal simple and old, binary code. It repeated only once before vanishing. The translators took hours to confirm it. 4 words in ancient Terran language. "We're coming home now." The Council panicked in silence. They didn't announce it publicly. They simply held emergency meetings in sealed chambers. Representatives of 2,000 species gathered, their voices rising and overlapping in fearful cacophony. "They said home," hissed the Urin delegate. "That could mean anything." "It means Sol," the Quarith ambassador countered. "They're recalling their fleets. Or worse, they're expanding again." Elder Serac sat at the center, silent, his many eyes fixed on the glowing message hovering in the air. Finally he spoke. "We summoned them once when we were desperate. We cannot pretend to be ready for them now." The counselors turned toward him. "What are you suggesting? That we submit to them?" "I'm suggesting we remember what we asked of them," Serac said softly, "and the cost they paid." But his words were lost amid the noise. The Council voted to re-establish observation networks around Sol, to monitor for potential escalation. It didn't matter. The humans had already noticed. The first sign came from the edge of the Seraph Belt, where mining colonies vanished overnight. No debris, no distress calls, just silence. Patrols sent to investigate never returned. When the Council finally deployed reconnaissance drones, they found something impossible. The miners were alive. They'd been relocated, hundreds of thousands of them, onto orbital habitats far beyond the colony's reach. And those habitats bore Terran design. The drones captured a single transmission before being destroyed. A human voice, female, cold and calm. Unauthorized interference with Terran restoration zones will be considered hostile. Maintain distance. The Council recognized the tone immediately. It was the sound of ownership, not negotiation. Within weeks, reports multiplied. Human ships, black and silent, appearing without hyperspace signatures. They dismantled derelict battlefields, harvesting wreckage and devourer fragments, towing them toward unknown destinations. When confronted, they offered no explanations, only warnings. The galaxy began to realize that humanity hadn't vanished after the war. They'd been rebuilding, quietly, methodically, beyond the rim. And now, they were expanding again. On Mars, beneath the crimson skies, the next generation had no memory of exile. They were children of the new age, born in orbit, raised in gravity wells of human design, their culture shaped by victory and survival. To them, the galaxy beyond Sol was not a place of wonder but of caution. One such child, Lieutenant Mara Cortez, stood on the bridge of the Vigilant Dawn II, the first of the Ghost Fleet vessels. She was the granddaughter of the admiral who disappeared into the rift. Her ship was unlike any other, a fusion of human steel and devourer biotech, its hull alive, its core breathing. It could slip through space not by tearing holes in it, but by gliding through folds of dimension the Council's science still denied existed. Her mission was simple: retrieve what remained of the old battlefields and ensure that no trace of humanity's war technology fell into alien hands. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The Terran Confederacy was preparing for something bigger, a future where they would never again depend on anyone else. When her ship intercepted a Council probe near the outer colonies, she didn't fire. She let it record. Let it see the new generation of Terran warcraft gliding silently through the dark. Let them watch, she said. Let them remember what fear feels like. In the Council's halls, Elder Serac watched the footage with something between dread and awe. The ship moved like liquid shadow, its hull shifting as if alive. No drive signature, no heat bloom. It was beyond anything the Concorde could build. "They've become something else," whispered one of the younger delegates. Serac nodded. "They always were." Word spread across the galaxy. Rumors of Terran vessels passing unseen, of colonies suddenly fortified with unmarked defense grids, of entire asteroid fields vanishing overnight. Some claimed the humans were building a ring around Sol, an artificial barrier that could seal them off forever. Others believed they were creating a fleet capable of extinguishing stars. The truth, as always, was stranger. Hidden in the dark between systems, humanity was building the Vanguard Line, a chain of autonomous stations equipped with weapons designed not for war, but for deterrence. They had seen the Devourers, they had seen the Council's weakness, and they knew that peace built on fear was the only kind that lasted. To the Council, it looked like a threat. To humanity, it was insurance. 1 year after the signal, a Council delegation finally requested audience with the Terran Confederacy. No one expected a reply, but the answer came swiftly. A single transmission, coordinates attached. When the Council's flagship arrived, it found a colossal station orbiting Jupiter's moon Europa. Its size dwarfed anything they had ever seen. It wasn't military, at least not entirely. It was a city, a forge, and a monument all at once. President Cade was gone by then, but her successor, Director Eli Navarro, greeted them personally. He was a tall, dark-eyed man whose presence filled the chamber like gravity. "Welcome to Bastion," he said, "the heart of the new Terran frontier." The alien envoys were silent, awed, and terrified. They'd expected defenses, not civilization. Elder Serac, old and frail, bowed deeply. "Director Navarro, we came seeking understanding. Your silence these past decades has unsettled the conquered. We fear miscommunication." Navarro smiled faintly. "You fear a great many things, Elder. Miscommunication is the least of them." Serac's voice trembled. "Are we enemies?" "No," Navarro said. "Not unless you try to make us one. We've seen what lies beyond your maps. The Devourers were just the first shadow. There are others. We'll fight them when they come. But not as your soldiers." The delegates exchanged uneasy glances. "Then what are you?" one asked. Navarro's eyes hardened. "We're the wall between you and the dark." The meeting ended with no treaty, No alliance, no promises. Only an understanding. Humanity had outgrown the Council. Years later, as Elder Serac lay dying in his quarters, he looked up at the night sky one last time. The stars glimmered faintly through the thin atmosphere of Aurelion, and he thought of the first time he'd seen a human. How fragile they'd seemed, soft and small. And yet here they were, shaping the galaxy's fate. He whispered to himself, voice barely a rasp. They were right to fear you. His vision dimmed. The last thing he saw before the end was a distant light, a Terran ship crossing the heavens like a silent watchman. And across the galaxy, the legend of humanity spread again. No longer as monsters or saviors, but as something far older, far more inevitable. The Council had declared them too dangerous. They had begged them for help. Now the galaxy lived in the shadow of their silence, protected by the same hands it had once tried to bind. Because humanity had learned the oldest truth of all. You can fear the dark for only so long, before you become the fire that keeps it away. The dark between galaxies was not empty. Humanity had learned that truth the hard way. Beyond the faint rim of known stars, there were currents and echoes, drifting shapes that moved too slow for light to reveal. They were ancient, older than the Council, older than the Devourers. The humans called them sleepers, and in the silence of the void they had begun to stir. No one knew this yet. Not the Council, not the colonies, not even most of humanity itself. Only a handful of Terran explorers, descendants of the Vigilant Dawn crew, had seen the edges of that awakening. They had gone farther than anyone else, chasing the last coordinates sent by Admiral Rain Cortez decades earlier. Lieutenant Mara Cortez, now commander of the Vigilant Dawn II, stood on her ship's observation deck, staring into the black swirl ahead. It was not quite a nebula, not quite a shadow, something that devoured energy and thought alike. Her scientists called it a gravitational scar left by the war. But she knew better. Somewhere in there, her grandmother had vanished. "Scan complete," said the voice of her AI, Vox. "No signals detected, but there's movement within the distortion. Non-Newtonian. Directional." "Alive?" Mara asked. "Possibly." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Grandmother, if you're still out there." But before she could finish, alarms flared. A pulse of energy rippled through the rift, powerful enough to disrupt their shields. The stars bent, light twisted, and suddenly something emerged, massive, scarred, and unmistakably Terran. The Vigilant Dawn. The original. Its hull was blackened, fused with alien tissue. Its engines glowed a cold organic blue. For a moment, no one breathed. Then a voice crackled through the comms, weak, distorted, but human. "This is Admiral Rain Cortez," it said. "To any Terran vessel. The war isn't over." News of the transmission reached Earth within hours. Director Eli Navarro called an emergency session in Bastion's Core Council. Across the table, generals, scientists, and diplomats stared at the recording in disbelief. Cortez was supposed to be dead. Every simulation, every scan had confirmed the destruction of her fleet. But there she was, alive, aged beyond measure, her ship half machine, half something else. "She's warning us," said Navarro. "But of what?" Dr. Harlan Ives, chief of xenobiology, leaned forward. The signature embedded in the transmission. "It's not entirely human. There's a devourer pattern interlaced in the code." Navarro frowned. "You're saying she's compromised? Or she's evolved?" The room went silent. Humanity had always been adaptable. But to merge with what they once fought, to become part of it, was something else entirely. Finally, Navarro spoke. "Prepare a retrieval mission. We're bringing her home." Mara Cortez was already ahead of him. Her ship hovered alongside the derelict Vigilant Dawn, tethered by magnetic clamps. Boarding teams crossed the void in armored suits, their lights flickering against hull plates covered in strange growths. It looked like coral, alive and pulsing, but metallic beneath the surface. Inside, the corridors were silent. Every wall breathed faintly, like lungs. They passed through rooms filled with withered remains of crew, bones wrapped in vines of silver. yet their faces, frozen in death, looked peaceful. At the heart of the ship, Mara found her Rain Cortez sat upon the command throne, alive but transformed. Her skin shimmered faintly, veins glowing blue beneath the surface. Her eyes were not entirely human anymore. "You came," she said, voice calm and hollow. Mara removed her helmet. "You're alive." Rain smiled faintly. "Alive is a word for those who stopped changing. I didn't stop. What happened to you?" The Devourers weren't creatures. They were fragments, cells of something older. I followed their origin, found what birthed them, and it's waking. Mara's blood ran cold. "The sleepers?" Rain nodded slowly. "They're not invaders. They're custodians. They cleanse galaxies when civilizations grow too loud. The Devourers were their first wave, a test. We passed. Barely. But now the real harvest begins. Then we have to warn Earth." Rain's hand rose, trembling. "No, you have to prepare. Warning them will change nothing. They're coming not for our bodies, but our light, the energy of thought, the pulse of minds. And they'll find us by the noise of our civilization." The ship trembled. Vox's voice crackled over comms. "Commander, multiple contacts incoming. Unknown configuration. They're not using drives I can detect." Rain stood, her movements fluid, almost ethereal. "They found me. I drew them here, to buy you time. Go. I'm not leaving you again." Rain's smile was sad. "You never truly lost me. I've been guiding you from the dark since you were born." And before Mara could answer, the hull shook with impact. A blinding light filled the bridge. Shapes, vast and impossible, emerged from the void. They weren't ships. They were patterns of geometry, living constellations that bent reality around them. Rain pushed Mara toward the airlock. "Go! You're not ready to fight them yet. But you will be. Grandmother, tell Earth this. The light is waking. The airlock sealed." As the vigilant Dawn 2 pulled away, the old ship flared with impossible energy, then vanished, swallowed by the rift. When Mara returned to Bastion, the Council was waiting. Not the Galactic Council. They no longer dared step foot in Terran space, but humanity's own. She stood before them, pale and shaking, as she played the recording. Rain's final words echoed in the chamber. "The light is waking." Navarro paced slowly. "If what she says is true, these sleepers could make the Devourers look like insects." Dr. Ives adjusted his datapad, hands trembling. "We've seen anomalies, energy readings beyond the rim. Systems flickering out as if their stars were devoured, but without debris. It matches the pattern." Navarro turned to Mara. "You were with her. What's your impression?" Mara hesitated. She wasn't human, but she wasn't gone either. It was like she'd seen something so vast she couldn't fit inside herself anymore. And she believed every word. Navarro looked at the assembled officers. "Then we prepare." From that moment, Bastion changed. Its factories shifted to full production, not for conquest, but for endurance. The Vanguard line expanded beyond Sol's Edge, weaving into the Oort barrier. Massive world ships were commissioned, arc vessels capable of carrying millions across the void if retreat became necessary. And beneath the ice of Europa, something new was built. Project Obsidian. Few knew what it was. Some said it was a weapon. Others whispered it was a doorway. Something that could fold space around humanity and hide them from the sleepers entirely. Whatever it was, Navarro ordered its completion in secret. "We can't stop what's coming," he said to Mara one night as they stood before the blue glow of Jupiter. "But we can choose how we face it." Meanwhile, the galaxy began to tremble again. Distant worlds went dark one by one. The Council sent fleets, but they never returned. Stars flickered out like candles in a storm. The sleepers had awakened. Their arrival wasn't violent. Not at first. Reality itself began to thin, dreams bleeding into matter. Entire species fell silent overnight. Their minds folded into light. The survivors screamed prayers to gods that had never existed. And then the sleepers spoke. Not with words, but with pressure on the mind. An ocean of thought pressing against every consciousness. "We come to restore the silence." In Bastion, humanity prepared. The Terran fleet stood ready, their ships alive with fusion fire, their soldiers wearing armor that hummed with borrowed devourer technology. They knew this battle couldn't be won through strength alone, but through will. Mara stood aboard her ship, staring into the void. "What if we can't stop them?" she asked Vox quietly. The AI's voice was soft. "Then we make sure they remember us." When the first sleeper construct entered Sol, its presence bent planets from orbit. Moons shattered like glass. Earth itself trembled. Clouds of aurora swirling across the sky as if the atmosphere could feel the intruder. Humanity's fleets rose from orbit like sparks from a bonfire. Navarro's voice echoed across every channel. "You declared us too dangerous." "You were right. But danger is what keeps the dark afraid." And then the Terran fleets attacked. The battle was chaos beyond imagination. Sleeper constructs didn't fight conventionally. They unmade matter, warped time, turned thoughts into weapons. Ships vanished, reappeared as ghosts, exploded in light that burned through dimensions. Yet the humans adapted, as they always had. They learned in seconds, sacrificed thousands to understand one weakness, and when they found it, they struck with everything. Mara's ship pierced through the core of one sleeper construct, releasing a payload of quantum warheads and a signal embedded with her grandmother's voice. The echo spread through the sleeper network like a virus, not a weapon, but memory. The voice of humanity's defiance, raw and endless, bleeding into their collective. "We'll die eventually." But not quietly. The constructs hesitated. For the first time they faltered. Consciousness itself rippled through their lattice, overwhelmed by something alien to them. Emotion. And in that hesitation, humanity struck again. One by one, the sleepers withdrew, their light dimming. Not defeated, just confused. It was enough. Weeks later, the galaxy was quiet again. Entire systems were gone, but Sol still burned. Humanity stood, bruised but alive. The sleepers had receded beyond the rim, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting. In Bastion's memorial hall, Mara placed a plaque beside her grandmother's statue. The inscription read, "She went into the dark so others could see." Eli Navarro joined her, his face pale but resolute. "You think they'll come back?" he asked. She nodded. "They always do. But so will we." Navarro looked at her, pride in his eyes. "The Council's asking to renew the alliance." Mara smiled faintly. "Let them ask. We'll answer when we decide the stars are safe." Outside, the rebuilt fleets shimmered in orbit. Thousands of ships, silent sentinels against the void. Humanity had become what the galaxy once feared, and what it now depended on. Not conquerors, not saviors, guardians forged in war, tempered by fire, unbroken by fear. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, a faint voice echoed through the void. Rain Cortez, or what was left of her, watching the stars awaken once more. "We keep the light because the Council had declared humanity too dangerous, because the galaxy had begged for their help, and because when the dark came again, there would be only one answer left to give. Humanity. Always humanity."